Today we're going to be making a couple of racks of baby back ribs. I'll be making one on the pit barrel cooker and one on the Camp Chef Woodwind pellet smoker. I'm adding to my grill collection, and I just purchased a Blackstone 4-burner 36-inch griddle, and I'm running out of room on my patio. So as part of this contest, I'm trying to see if maybe I can get rid of my old pit barrel cooker and replace it with the Camp Chef. I've had the barrel for a couple of years, and I think when it behaves, it really produces some of the best food I've ever made, if not the best food I've ever tasted, period. However, the internal temperature can be difficult to control. Sometimes it runs cold, sometimes it runs hot, and there are really no controls to bring the heat up or bring the heat down. There's a vent on the bottom, and you can also control the airflow by opening or closing the lid, and that's it. And again, usually that's fine, but sometimes for no good reason, it'll run on the colder side or the hotter side, and it makes it challenging to cook. So that's why I finally bought a pellet cooker a few months ago. Before we get into the cook itself, let's just do a quick comparison of the two grills. As I often say, there is beauty in simplicity, and the pit barrel is definitely simple. It uses charcoal instead of pellets. It's relatively cheap at about $400. It's typically very smoky, and most importantly, the food that comes out of it tastes amazing most of the time. The Camp Chef Woodwind is a pellet smoker, and it requires electricity. The price is about $900, which is about double. The taste is pretty good, but it has almost no smoke taste at all unless you use a smoker tube, and I go into that in my longer review video. The real advantage of a pellet smoker is that it uses electricity and it cooks very much like an oven. So if you set it for 250 degrees, you'll get about 250 degrees for as long as you want. And I find the Camp Chef to be pretty reliable, but it's definitely not without its quirks. And again, take a look at my full review video for some more information. Alright, now with all that out of the way, let's get some ribs going. I have a couple of racks of baby back ribs from Smithfield. They're labeled extra tender, extra juicy. They're usually pretty good. And for seasonings, I use my usual, I started out with a binder of mustard with salt, pepper, onion, garlic, and brown sugar. And for sauce, I used Blues Hog Smoky Mountain. Now remember, each one of these different grills has a different fuel source. On the left, you'll see the smoker tube that's being lit up with one of my fire starters. And on the right side, you'll see a charcoal chimney that's also being started by one of my fire starters. I was trying to get these cooking at about the same time to see if I could wrap them both up in about 4 hours. And here I'm just checking the level of the pellets in the hopper to make sure that I'm not going to run out. So after about 15 minutes, I think we're just about ready to go. The smoker tube is smoking and the charcoal is glowing. So I put the charcoal in the pit barrel along with the 2 hanging rods, and I also put the smoker tube into the Camp Chef. We'll shut the lid on both of them and let everything come up to temperature and settle down a bit before we put the meat in. Okay, looks like we're ready to go. I usually end up cutting racks of ribs into half, so I'm working with a half rack. I find that it's easier to work with when hanging them on the pit barrel. I think it cooks more evenly, and it's a little less weight on the hook. I have had a rack of ribs actually fall into the charcoal, and I was not able to recover them. So working with a half rack is typically best. Now we'll put the other 2 halves on the Camp Chef. You might notice that I added a water pan. I've been experimenting with that to see if we could increase the moisture a bit. I was going to cook these at 225, but looking at some of my notes from previous cooks, looks like I had some good luck at 250, so that's where we ended up on the Camp Chef. As for the pit barrel, you really can't adjust the temperature, so I'm hoping it stays at about a 250 to 275 range. That seems to be where I have the best results with ribs. I mentioned that sometimes you get surprise temperature variation on the pit barrel cooker. One of the things I read in a forum that was interesting is you might want to use a mallet to make sure that the cover is seated properly. It sounds like over time the metal might warp a little bit. That increases the airflow, which could increase the temperature. After running for about 3 hours undisturbed, I went out to check on them and I wanted to add sauce to each of them. First up was the pit barrel cooker. This is what they look like without sauce, and this is what they look like after sauce. It's a beautiful mahogany red color. Next up were the ribs on the Camp Chef. They look pretty comparable. Nice color even without sauce, but back to that beautiful red mahogany with the sauce. Put them on for another hour and then I'll pull them off. So this was the end result after 4 hours. They looked pretty comparable. They had a comparable bend and pullback on the bones. So nothing really looked and felt very different. So here I am cutting the ribs, and the tenderness was pretty even as well. So the bottom line is, how did everything taste? Well, they tasted pretty close too, unless you really concentrated, and then, in our opinion, the pit barrel cooker tasted and smelled a little bit better. It just had that charcoal flavor. And I'm not just saying that. It was a very slight difference, but it was definitely there if you concentrated on it. What I was hoping for was that the pit barrel cooker would have acted up and frustrated me, so then I could have given it away and cleared up some room on my patio. I ended up giving some ribs to some of the kids in the neighborhood to have them do a blind taste test. And surprisingly, they came back and they said that they really liked all of them, but they liked the Camp Chef ribs a little bit better. So in the end, I guess it sounds like a tie. Some people like the pit barrel ribs and some like the Camp Chef ribs. So after all that, nothing is really resolved. If you prefer the real charcoal taste and like to possibly tame the fire and have a little more control, then maybe stick with the pit barrel cooker. If you want to deal with something that's more of an oven and is a little more predictable, then stick with the Camp Chef. So I guess the bottom line is that I need a bigger patio. I won't be getting rid of any of my grills anytime soon. Well, hopefully you enjoyed watching this video. Please be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.